morning, everyone, and welcome to episode 135 of the Retrospectives podcast. Yu-Gi-Oh! 5DS World Championship 2011 over the Nexus, which from this point onwards will just be referred to as Yu-Gi-Oh! 2011 because that title is ridiculous. My name is Patrick Arthur, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, James Turlings. James, you and I have been playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Non-stop for the past month. How have you enjoyed it? I know that you're a big Yu-Gi-Oh! Fan, that you've played a lot of this stuff historically. Have you enjoyed your time playing this Yu-Gi-Oh! Video game?
Oh, absolutely. I was super excited for this episode because generally I play a lot of the modern card game online, and kind of going back in time to this older format and playing, a single player game, which there used to be a lot of these kinds of titles out in the wild. They'd do one of these every few years, not just in the World Championship series, but there was more creative titles like I think stuff like Duelist of the Roses and Dungeon Dice Monsters game. And these things kind of just evaporated in the last half decade or so. So I was kind of missing these. I used to play a few of these when I was younger. And of course, we met playing card games, right? So I thought it was well overdue for us to finally cover a game for the show. But it's actually kind of hard to find card game video games that aren't, indie roguelites released in the last 10 years or so. Finding something 15 years or older. And we even had to stretch with this one. This one's only 14 years old. But, we've...
What a dirty cheater, James.
Yeah, a little bit. So, yeah, been having a lot of fun playing through this one.
As James said, we met playing Magic the Gathering, and as a consequence, James and I are deep into the weeds with that game. We've got a lot of experience playing Magic in a lot of different versions of that format. I played Yu-Gi-Oh! In high school, but, like a kid idiot plays card games, so not in any sense competitive. But this was around the time the game was first released, so I was playing like the first, second, third sets of Yu-Gi-Oh, which is very different from what it is in this game, and even more different from what the game is today. As James said, nowadays your card games that you have access to are broadly divided into two categories. You've got your online gacha platforms, so that's the Magic Arena and what's the Yu-Gi-Oh one called,
Like
James?
Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, yeah, or Duel Links. There's a couple actually.
There's the Marvel card game and so on and so forth. Games that are basically
Live service, big card
live
games,
service,
yeah.
yeah. So really like well designed for the most part in terms of representing the video game, but with a pay to win or pay to play, I guess is more accurate model where the idea is to suck money from the player base as much as they possibly can. Or you've got your indie take on the genre, which are mostly roguelikes. Slay the Spire, obviously, kicked off this entire genre in a big way. There have been some attempts to make single player ones. One I played, which I enjoyed a lot, was Gwent Thronebreaker. I don't know if you're familiar with that one at all, James.
Yeah, originally after Witcher 3 came out, they made a standalone version of Gwent, which I think eventually became Thronebreaker, which I played at the beginning, and then around the time Thronebreaker came out, kind of dropped off a bit. Gwent was a very, very consistent card game. Like, games felt very samey, but I kind of liked that for, a month or two.
Yeah, so the closest game we've played to this for the show is probably Mega Man Battle Network
Yeah, weirdly
3,
enough.
which isn't purely a card game, but it shares a lot of characteristics with it. And I think that in terms of it being like a single player version of it, it's the closest. But honestly, this is a rare genre. This is a genre where actually going back in time to play an old game might be the best way to experience it. So I think it's a really good choice for the show, James. Particularly since Yu-Gi-Oh has such a interesting history from its humble beginnings to what it is now.
Yeah, starting off as kind of like a game inspired by Magic, to eventually, being some, which is kind of weird, right? Because it's completely different. I think it ended up carving out a niche that sets it apart from a lot of other card games in terms of like It doesn't have a mana system is the biggest one, I think, and it's extra deck, which, we'll talk about that stuff later.
Yeah, so we're going to be doing things a little differently for this episode. So James and I are both card game fanatics. Like we love them, we love thinking about them, we love talking about them. So what we're going to do is before we get into the detail of this video game specifically, we're going to take some time to talk about Yu-Gi-Oh as a card game in general. We're mostly going to focus the discussion on the way it is presented in Yu-Gi-Oh 2011, but we will have little sidesteps into other card games and into the game in its present form. Just because we want to philosophically talk about what Yu-Gi-Oh does well, maybe what it doesn't do so well. After that, we'll get into the video game itself, because the video game itself has the card game front and center, but Yu-Gi-Oh, the video game, is distinct from playing Yu-Gi-Oh. Yu-Gi-Oh is the core mechanic of the video game, but that's not the sum total of the video game, and that's how you can't think of them as analogous. So I want to talk about the card game a lot to start with, to kind of really flesh out the core mechanics of what you'll be doing most of your time engaging in 2011. Then we'll get into the actual video game later.
Yeah, and we'll try to keep the discussion pretty low level, at least to begin with, for people who aren't so familiar with the game. And we'll try not to go off on big philosophical tangents too much, at least to start
But
with.
we will.
Yeah, but we
But
will.
warning, we will.
Yeah.
So, for those who have never listened to us before, James and I are the Retrospectives podcast. What we do each episode is we play classic or cult classic games of the past, and then we discuss if they've stood the test of time and are worth playing today. This is a harsh standard of criticism because we're not really seeking to understand these games in the historical context in which they are made. We just want to know if it's worth your time to play today amongst all the modern games that have come out. And I think that this game in particular is an interesting case study because of the lack of single player card games that exist, at least non roguelike ones in today's world. So, James, let's talk a little bit more about our experiences with Yu-Gi-Oh. We have touched on it briefly, but I really want to go into it. You play Yu-Gi-Oh a lot
Yep.
right now. I know that you play on the modern platform. So, can you just tell us a little bit about that and about your history with Yu-Gi-Oh, maybe your familiarity with the format in which this video game takes place in, if any?
So, my experience with the game began with watching the TV show as a teenager. Over in Australia, we had anime play in the morning from about 7 o'clock till about 9 o'clock.
Earlier.
Yeah,
6 a.m.
6:30.
Cheese
6.
TV, man.
Yeah, and if you got up too early, you were forced to watch the aerobics channel instead.
Gym
while
girls,
waiting,
yeah.
waiting for Dragon Ball Z to start. But yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh played on Cheese TV in Australia when I was in the 5th grade in school, and I remember like at school that started such a problem because like that first month, everybody fucking loved the show, right? There was people bringing cards in and playing duels and stealing cards, and the school,
Oh, yeah.
the school had to take action and then ban it, but then people found ways to like play duels. Like it was all over the school, right? It was very big here. So that was great. And I didn't really play too much of it after like junior school. It kind of petered off in popularity a little bit. Around probably, I would still buy structure decks and just have them like at home and look at them and wish I could play, but not actually be able to play the game right. And then when I got to university, for me, going from high school to university was interesting because I went from being in high school and not really relating to too many other people to going to university studying, computer science and whatever, engineering, and everyone is now a nerd, right? Except, it's not just me. And lots of people there actually did play Yu-Gi-Oh! So I actually played a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh! There. Although I was playing my terrible structure decks against people who had real decks and getting completely destroyed. I ended up making some friends who also had terrible decks, and we'd play in between class. So that was fun. So then, big gap, like 10-year gap. And then around the time that we had the pandemic, Konami releases Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, which is their competitor to Magic Arena, so their online client where you get to play the game. In terms of card pool, Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel is about 9 months behind the current paper format. But when it released, it was about 5 years behind.
Can we also just mention quickly here that the standard format for Yu-Gi-Oh is Vintage, the equivalent of Vintage in Magic, or basically all the cards are legal. There's not a rotating format.
Yeah,
There are lots of bans and restrictions, but the cards that were released when in set one are still legal to play in modern day Yu-Gi-Oh.
yeah, and they kind of enforce formats by just slowly but surely power creeping the previous card pool. Like the cards playable today invalidate a lot of the cards in the last like 20 years, which is a bit sad, but you know,
But they also don't they also do the opposite? They also validate older cards sometimes.
they do. They give support to older strategies and make them
Hmm.
playable again. For example, in the last year, Blue Eyes became a real deck you can play, and not just play like an actual good deck, one of the best decks.
Hmm.
So they are constantly, making new cards that bring older strategies back. Recently, they made, Mystical Space Typhoon, the instant speed.
Yes.
They made an entire new archetype dedicated to making that card good. Uh,
What?
yeah, it's called Radiant Typhoon. But yeah, they do like bring back nostalgia stuff pretty often.
Which does happen in Magic the Gathering sometimes as well. Like, for example, when Eldrazi were reintroduced, they kind of made that an archetype again,
Yep.
but it's a lot rarer in Magic.
Yeah, I've been playing Master Duel a lot since 2020. I think it was a great time for them to release a card game. It had a huge, big player base, and I've played pretty much every format since it came out, so pretty familiar with everything, all the modern decks basically.
What about your experience with the format as it existed in 2011? So the format in the video game.
Yeah, that one thing it was a bit hard for me to adapt to because it's very alien to me. Having played the modern format for like 5 years, the 2011 format is much slower to starters. Cards like trap cards are generally too slow nowadays. Like they're still, if your deck doesn't search a trap card, it's pretty much unplayable. Whereas in 2011, this idea of hard drawing cards is kind of applicable still, or at least at the start of the video game. I think by the end of the video game, the power level that you can of decks you can make is such that you can get real high consistency. But certainly at the beginning of the game, it's a very much a like you put the best cards you can find in your deck. You play lots of spell trap removal, you summon one monster a turn, as opposed to the modern game, which is like I go first, I take 30 actions or something.
Hmm.
It's much different. So I was actually losing quite a bit because I had to readjust my um like attitude towards certain strategies and types of card, which was fun, I thought.
Yeah, I'm a lot less familiar with the game than you are. Like I said, I played it a little bit in school,
Mm,
and I watched the anime. I'm a big fan of Yu-Gi-Oh! Abridged, Little Karibo's series. I've watched that multiple times. He's really the guy that kicked off Abridged series that kind of like
yeah.
reveled in how stupid the show was, but it was coming from a place of love. It wasn't like mean spirited. And that's what I love about a bridge series. They're made by people who are dedicated fans, but at the same time can see how silly the show
Mm,
fundamentally is. So I've always had it on my radar, but mechanically, outside of the basics, I was very unfamiliar with the game, and even synchro summoning, which is one of the mechanics. I think that came with the motorbike series. Is that correct?
yes, correct. It was introduced
Yeah.
with 5Ds.
So I had never done that before, and since then there's been lots of other ones. So I was still when I played this game last, it was normal summons and then the various special summons. I think polymerization I did play with, although I never really did it because I couldn't figure out
Yeah.
how it could be possibly worth it. That is all very different now, and the different routes. One of the things I found really interesting about the game was how everything seemed mostly viable,
Mm.
which was interesting. I think that what we should do, James, is we should just really this out in a set out how Yu-Gi-Oh functions
Yeah.
as it's written, because I think that we can explain the basics here.
Yep, absolutely. So, Yugioh at a baseline is a game where both players start with 8,000 life points, and the goal of the game is to use monsters that you summon from your hand to attack the opponent and reduce their life points to 0, at which point you win the game, right?
Yep.
And in general, there are three card types. There are monsters which have an attack and a defense number. You can summon them in attack mode or defense mode, which they use the different numbers. If an attack position monster attacks your opponent directly, has 2,000 attack, that deals 2,000 damage to your opponent's life points. If your opponent has a monster that has 1,000 attack, and you attack that monster with your 2,000 attack, your opponent will take the difference, so they'll take 1,000 damage. But if
And the monster will be destroyed.
yeah, and the monster will be destroyed. You can, if your opponent has multiple monsters, you can choose which one to attack, like in Hearthstone, or not like in Magic.
Hearthstone's a pretty good comparison point, I think, because I
Yeah.
think at a basic level, this game plays more like Hearthstone, where board presence and committing to the board is more relevant.
Yeah. Defense position monsters, you never lose life points when they get attacked and destroyed. So other than monsters, you also have spell cards, which, they're green and they just do something, like you can play it and it says destroy target monster, or you can have different types of spells, right? You can have equip spells, like a sword that you can put on your monster to make it stronger. Then there are traps, which you can't activate during your turn. You need to place them face down. And then when your opponent satisfies a condition, you can activate them. So the most basic one is Trap Hole. So when your opponent summons a monster with 1,000 or more attack, you can activate the trap to destroy the monster immediately.
It's normal summons, right? Specifically.
Yes, yeah, and that's
Yeah.
important too. So, Yu-Gi-Oh, unlike a lot of other card games, doesn't have a mana system. The whole point of the mana system is to limit the number of cards you can play in a turn. So theoretically, because there's no mana, you could just dump your whole hand on turn one. However, in the original and this older format, the limiting factor is the normal summon, which is you can summon one monster a turn normally. Monsters have levels as well, from 1 to 12. Monsters that are level 1 to 4, you can just summon them immediately. Monsters that are 5 to 6 stars or levels, you need to actually sacrifice or tribute one of your monsters to summon it. And then monsters with stars 7 and up, you need to tribute, send to the graveyard or the discard pile 2 monsters on your field. So the idea is generally that summoning really powerful monsters has a cost associated with it, either through sending cards on your field, or if they have a special way to summon themselves, they'll normally have some kind of thing that removes cards from your hands in order to get them out. So there's a kind of like risk inherent in that, right? Because if you have a small monster, you sacrifice it for a big monster, and then they use a spell to kill it, you've kind of lost 2 monsters technically in that trade. It's kind of bad. But big monsters can attack over smaller monsters, so there's a bit of risk reward kind of happening there.
And when you use your monster, you can use your monsters to destroy enemy monsters. So it's a way to get back the card advantage.
Yep.
And in Yu-Gi-Oh, all monsters have haste, so they can attack immediately, unlike Magic, where they have to stay static. Um, In this sense, Yu-Gi-Oh, I guess you could say, plays as a fusion of Hearthstone and Magic the Gathering, because while it has the board presence and committing large monsters to the board is good, and your monsters act as removal for opponents' monsters of Hearthstone, it does have instant speed interaction in its form of fast spells and trap cards, and even some monster abilities, although instant speed monster abilities are very rare in Yu-Gi-Oh, or at least they are in Yu-Gi-Oh
They
2011.
are in 2011, yeah, they're very common these
Yeah.
days. So,
Yeah. So you do have instant speed interaction, which is to me one of the defining features of Magic the Gathering. Although not to the same degree as Magic. And then you have the board presence of Hearthstone. And I think at face value, Hearthstone is the closest equivalent to Yu-Gi-Oh! If you haven't played them.
yeah, yeah, and that kind of instant speed stuff. So, like, I guess what we're saying here is if you play a card, and then before that card's effect resolves, your opponent can respond and play their own card, and then you can respond to that, and you can kind of get this chain. It's literally called the chain in Yu-Gi-Oh, of several effects stacking up, and then once both players are said we're done, the chain will resolve in the most recent card that was placed on the chain to the end. So you can get things like I summon a monster. The other person goes, I activate trap hole. The other player goes, I activate trap negation to stop your trap hole to get my monster to go through. And you can get these big chains of you trying to one up each other, right? And then that'll all resolve eventually, potentially starting more chains after. But it adds a lot of depth to the game, which I think Hearthstone kind of lacks by comparison.
Yeah, the interaction is a good thing. The interaction makes the game feel more dynamic and fun rather than each player taking their turn in sequence. You've got this whole third middle ground of playing on each other's turn, which just from playing both, it's a lot more fun
Yeah,
than simply taking your turns one by one. And I think it's what separates these card games in a big way from board games. Board games, you just have your turn. In Magic and Yu-Gi-Oh, you're simultaneously both having your turns in a sense because you're both having to pay attention and interact at the right moment on each other's turns.
yeah. And for in terms of like presentation, like in the anime, for example, this back and forth interaction was a very big part of creating dramatic tension in the show, right? Like you're the main character will play a card and the antagonist will go, ha, I activate my trap, right? There's like these big unexpected like you have your plan that you make during your turn and then you go to execute your plan. Your opponent does something to throw a spanner in the works and now you have to reevaluate and try to make the best with what you got in face of unexpected outcomes, and it leads to a less predictable and more kind of exciting game, I feel.
I completely agree. It's dynamic and interesting, and I think that the idea of like in Magic, a lot of your interaction is played from the hand. At least in the older game, a lot of your interaction is played from the field. So when you place these cards face down on the field and your opponent can see them and knows that there's something but doesn't know what they are, it kind of creates a feeling of tension that really raises the stakes.
Yeah, and so one thing you can do, for example, is if I have a trap and if I have a really powerful trap in my hand and a kind of a spell I don't care about, what I can do is I can place the spell face down. My opponent doesn't know if that's a spell or a trap, and they might be a bit scared of it, so they'll use one of their spells to destroy it, and then now I know they probably don't have a second destruction effect in their hand. I can play my trap and it's a bit safer. Like you can play mind games like that with face down cards. You can also play
Mm.
monsters face down, and many monsters have abilities that trigger when they're flipped face up, which they always are when they're attacked. So you can have, the classic man-eater bug. When it flips face up, destroy target monster. So you place that face down, they attack it with their big guy, it flips. It dies, but it will trigger and destroy their big guy as well. So there's, like tension and drama, risk reward. Um, I think it's pretty important. And I think you do get all of those things coming through in the 2011 game, which I think is important.
That's the basics. So let's talk a little bit about playing the game.
Hmm.
So, James, I have this idea. This idea is that to me, when you're building a deck in Yu-Gi-Oh, the end goal is essentially to subvert the rules of the game.
Hmm.
Um, in in the game, and listen, there might be a lot of technical terms that I am unaware of, but the way I kind of thought about them is that there are resource choke points in Yu-Gi-Oh. In Magic the Gathering. This is simple. It's you can play one land a turn and you draw one card a turn, and the mana system, of course.
Like
In
bottlenecks, right?
Yu-Gi-Oh, bottlenecks, yeah. In Yu-Gi-Oh, there are less bottlenecks because there's no mana system. However, you can only do one normal summon a turn. You have a limit on the number of cards in your hand, and you draw one card a turn. You have your life points, and then you have your cards in your extra deck. And just from playing Yu-Gi-Oh for and the hundreds of duels I've done now, the whole purpose of constructing a deck seems to be getting around these restrictions in one way or another.
Yes, pretty much, because we didn't mention the extra deck, just quickly. So
Oh yeah.
you have your main deck of 40 cards, and you also have an extra deck of 15 cards, which contains monsters that need to be summoned in a special way. For example, Yu-Gi-Oh has this concept of fusing monsters together. So they'll play a spell card that says, summon a fusion monster from your extra deck, and the monster in the extra deck will say, this is Gaia Dragon Champion, and you need to make it with exactly Gaia the Fierce Knight and Curse of Dragon. And if you send both of those cards from your hand to the graveyard with the spell, you can then put that monster straight from the extra deck on the field. And stuff like fusion monsters, synchro monsters live in there basically, rather than clogging up your main deck. So you can't actually draw those powerful cards.
And you don't want to.
Yeah, you don't want to. So most of your deck is dedicated towards figuring out how to summon those stronger cards.
Which is, in a sense, compared to other card games, to me, this is completely mad. You have 15 cards that you have consistently 100% of the time. Magic the Gathering tried this, where you had access to one card consistently 100% of the time, and it was completely and utterly busted. They had to ban half of them and nerf the mechanic and errata it, which is insane. This in Yu-Gi-Oh, you get 15 of these cards consistently 100% of the time. Now, these cards are quite specialized sometimes, and they sometimes require specific cards that you need to bring them out. So it's not like you just have access, and it's only monsters. So it's not like you have access to literally anything 100% of the time. But this extra deck changes the nature of the game dramatically from I guess how it was originally envisioned. Although the extra deck's been a thing from the start with polymerization, right?
Yes, yeah, it has been.
Yeah, but back when it was just polymerization, I feel like it was very different to how it is presented in 2011.
See, in the original kind of vision of the game, the fusion monsters you could summon actually weren't crazy powerful. They were mostly just bodies with no abilities with okay stat lines. The thing about them that was strong, quote unquote, was that you could theoretically do your normal summon and then also use polymerization to fuse a monster. So you could summon two monsters in a turn, which theoretically,
For free.
yeah, is quite powerful. Because normally, if you're both just going, I play my monster, I destroy your monster, I pass the turn, you kind of just trade back and forth without really getting ahead, getting control of the board or the game. So theoretically, if you can get around these restrictions that you mentioned, you can get ahead of your
Gain an
opponent,
advantage.
and start to create a snowballing advantage.
And yeah, I think that this extra deck, and this is essential to understanding Yu-Gi-Oh.
Mm,
We explained the basics of the game without the extra deck, and I think that if you were first playing this game back when it first released, that's all you really need to know to get started. But in 2011, the extra deck, it should function as one of the centerpieces of your strategy. I'm sure there are decks in this game that don't need it,
yeah.
but by the end of playing this game, every deck I built was heavily relying on the extra deck in various different ways.
Yeah. The start of the game, they give you a bunch of structure decks that don't rely on it at all. In fact, I got through a lot of the start of the game playing a lot of decks that didn't have extra decks, which I was personally interested in doing because
Mm.
that's not really possible in the modern game where your extra deck's super important. So having this game where I could play a more main deck focused strategy was kind of interesting to me. But yeah, it's very, very important in the long term. But you can get away without using it too much at the beginning of the game.
So, James, let me ask you this. So, you've got this extra deck where you've got these 15 cards at your disposal 100% of the time.
Yes.
Do you feel that this makes Yu-Gi-Oh too consistent a card game? Do you think that it lacks the variance of other card games for the better, or do you think it's for worse?
Um, I think that there's sort of two kinds of variants that we're going to be talking about here. I think that Yu-Gi-Oh! Like, when you take two completely different decks and you pit them against each other, you're going to get a unique play experience, right? Um,
Hmm.
which I think is the most important thing. There is also this kind of variance where, and this to me is a big drawback of maybe Magic or Hearthstone, less Hearthstone, more in Magic, but if I'm making a deck, normally I'm making a deck because I think there is this cool gameplay idea or mechanic or monster that I think's really cool and I want to do that with my deck. And
Hmm.
if I play Magic and I make a deck to do a certain thing, what that actually means is that in 1 in 5 games, I will get to do the cool thing that I built my deck to do because there's such a like you can only have a few copies of that important card. You can try to play some consistency, but it's very hard. There's not a lot of deck searching in Magic, whereas there's a lot of deck searching and there's your extra deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! In
Hmm.
Yu-Gi-Oh! I feel that I can consistently do my deck's thing while still, having variance in the different matchups. And because we talked about the Mechanic and Magic companion they added that was poorly received. That card, that one card, you could basically always just summon it. There was no really restrictions. Whereas in Yu-Gi-Oh, like to summon your fusion monsters, you have to first get the cards and the fusion spell right. So
Hmm.
you don't always get easy access to those things. You do a lot of the time, right? Decks are built to be consistent these
You
days.
do. I feel like you can consistently do something. Like you
Yeah,
might not be able to do everything, or you might not always be able to get the exact thing you want, but you can, if you build your deck correctly, you can consistently get something out of that deck, regardless of what hand you draw
yeah,
almost.
but it's not like you can do the same plays every single match, right?
That's
There's
true, yeah.
yeah,
And if it gets interacted with, the type of play you go for might be different.
yeah. So I still think there's actually a bit of variance in the game. I just think that one thing that I like is that I get to do generally the thing I built the deck to do quite often, which to me is enjoyable.
I do want to, yeah, I kind of completely agree with this. I think it's very interesting in Magic, and I'm sorry if I bring up Magic a lot.
We're going to,
It's
right?
my,
Yeah.
it's really the game I have the most familiarity with. But essentially in Magic, you look at the expensive cool creatures, right? The ones that cost 6, 7, 8 mana. And outside of the one or two really best ones, which are often reanimated targets or the combo targets essentially to win the game, the rest are in a competitive environment useless
Yeah.
because they cost too much. And in Magic, how much a spell costs is everything. Cheap spells are almost always better than more expensive spells because you can't afford to be sitting on cards that you cannot play in a game where your opponent plays all of the cards in the hand. In Yu-Gi-Oh, it's different. In Yu-Gi-Oh, you look at the awesome end game monster, and that is not only viable, it's often the strongest thing to do. And you can build the whole strategy of your deck around it and get something functional around it
Mm,
pretty easily. It might not necessarily be tier one or tier zero, right? But it can be viable in the context of at least the video game. And I really liked how that was a thing in Yu-Gi-Oh! You can kind of just get all the cool things and be like, okay, how do I polymerize this thing which requires these three specific materials? Which in Magic, those sort of setup restrictions would be like it'd just be impossible. Like
yeah.
every opponent deck would literally run straight over you before you started doing your nonsense bullshit. In Yu-Gi-Oh! That can win you the game. That can pull you
Mhm.
back from a losing scenario, and it's not as outlandish as you might think. So I did like in Yu-Gi-Oh, like as a new player, I could see a cool thing and do the cool thing
Yeah.
with relative consistency.
And another thing I guess I wanted to quickly mention was in Magic, we have the concept of the color wheel, which kind of reduces, like, it makes it hard for one deck to put any card in the deck, whereas at
Mm,
least in this older version of Yu-Gi-Oh, you can theoretically put any card in your deck with no restriction, but like, if I'm playing a fusion deck, I probably want to play polymerization. I probably want to play some cards that let me search for poly, which means that in practice, you actually build your decks quite differently depending on your overall strategy anyway. Without this kind of extra hand stopping you. In the modern game, there is this concept of locks, like if you play a spell card that's really powerful and summons a fusion monster, it will also say something like, for the rest of the turn, you can't summon monsters from the extra deck except dragon monsters,
mm.
which sort of stops certain strategies being mixed together, but it's still a lighter touch, I find, in general.
Just on that note, in Magic's color wheel,
The
this is
color wheel
the
is
other
cool, though,
massive.
don't get me wrong.
Well, the color wheel essentially allows for it restricts your deck building, but it also, as a consequence, um, allows different strategic variations
Mm,
of a strategy to exist, um, depending on what colors you choose to dabble into, and it allows for splashing. It's like, okay, I'm going to be primarily a black deck, but I'm also going to play a little bit of blue for counter
yeah.
magic. um, in Yu-Gi-Oh, the nature of decks is that they're what we would call tribal
Mm,
decks in Magic the Gathering. And almost every Yu-Gi-Oh deck is a tribal deck. A tribal deck is essentially a bunch of cards that have direct synergies written on them to with other cards or other card types. Like in Magic the Gathering, you might have something called a merfolk deck, which is a creature type. You'll play a bunch of creatures that are merfolks, and you might play spell cards, spell cards that you cast from your hand or enchantments that you place on the field that make merfolk creatures stronger. In Yu-Gi-Oh, as far as I can tell, all of the good deck archetypes, or almost all of them, will primarily be these archetype tribal decks where there's a lot of text on the cards all referring to other cards with specific restrictions.
yeah. And in Magic, I tend to find there's this kind of journey that new players go through where initially they're like, tribal decks are super cool because they're very thematic. Like, I can play all my goblins together and make a cool goblin deck. And then as you play the game more, you find that these sorts of deck building styles generally results in decks that don't have very interesting or unique strategies. I think you can play different strategies with goblins or with elves, but they're kind of one note. I find that the archetypes in Yu-Gi-Oh, they tend to be a bit more diverse in this range of strategy. Like, I guess there's so many of them that each do their
Mm.
kind of unique thing. And each archetype will have like a varied thing. Like this one might be good at traps and drawing cards and stuff.
But you also, the other thing you brought up when we were discussing this, James, earlier, is this concept of packages. So you
Yeah.
can be a tribal deck, but you don't need to commit 100% to being a tribal deck, and your deck only has tribal things. What in Magic the Gathering, you might splash an additional color for interaction or for an answer to your weakness. It seems to me in Yu-Gi-Oh, you splash packages in your deck,
Yeah.
which kind of do a thing. For me, the place I kind of dabbled with this the most was putting a package of tuner monsters
Mm.
in my decks to give me access to this different axis of strategy, which was these tuner synchro summons I could get from my extra deck.
Yeah, and there's a lot of mixing 2 or 3 archetypes together in Yu-Gi-Oh! Generally, which I find makes formats really interesting. Like normally, even if there's 1 or 2 best decks, there's like quite a lot of variations on those best decks. Like currently, the best deck I would say in Master Duel is Mitsurugi, which you can play either by itself or there's like 3, 4, or 5 other kinds of cards that you can mix in with it. So you still end up having, even if you have a somewhat one note format, I find there's a lot of variation within the format still, whereas I think Magic kind of gets to optimized lists a bit quicker, just because like the card pool at any given time is smaller because of the way they do formats. Like there's this thing that happens in Yu-Gi-Oh where there's this card that's been in the card pool for like 10 years and no one's ever played it, and then suddenly
Mm.
they print a new strategy and it's just randomly the best card in this new strategy. That happens quite a lot.
It happens with Magic sometimes as well.
Yeah.
Like KCI is definitely
Mm.
a really good example of a card that immediately broke the game in half once it got enough support, right? Um, I'm not going to go into that. That's too complicated.
Yeah.
A side note, but yeah, this is all to say that I think that Yu-Gi-Oh is interesting. It has a unique strategic identity, and I think it's a very fun game to think about and build decks in. It's
Yeah.
different from Magic, but I think it's interesting. I enjoyed a lot playing with it. James, I want to talk about something about Yu-Gi-Oh, which I think kind of sucks now.
Okay.
And I think the thing that Yu-Gi-Oh is weakest at by far is its combat, or its like bare bones on the board kind of like interaction of attacking and blocking,
Yeah.
because it's kind of non-existent, or it kind of plays itself. There's nothing really decision making wise that I think exists with the combat in Yu-Gi-Oh. Whereas I think that in Hearthstone and definitely Magic, these combat systems are a lot more robust and well designed and interesting, and require a lot of thought in order to decide what your best course of action is.
So, okay, so what I think we're talking about here is that I actually think this is less of a problem in the modern game to an extent, but we'll talk about it in terms of 2011. So, what
Mm.
tends to happen is that so it's important to note that the player who goes first can't attack on the first turn.
But they do draw a card for some reason.
Yeah, which you don't anymore, but yeah, back then we did. And the player who goes second can attack on turn 2. So, what you typically see in this older, slower game is that the player who goes first sets a monster face down in defense and then passes the turn. The player who goes second summons a big monster and then immediately attacks or tries to use a spell to remove the face down. And then the face down dies. Pass back the turn. The turn 3, like the first player plays a monster that's bigger, attacks, kills the other monster. And what we kind of see is that the board state basically changes entirely from turn to turn, and the decisions you make in combat are pretty much he has one monster. Do I have a monster that's bigger than it? If so, attack. Or does he have traps? If so, remove them. Um, Whereas in Magic, because you can't attack monsters directly, oftentimes instead of blocking an attack, you'll just take the damage in order to keep your monster alive. And thus, the board state kind of grows naturally. It's more like you start small and then you keep those monsters for quite a while, and then eventually you both have like five.
But it's not. I just want to say, James, it's not just the concept of not attacking monsters directly. I
Mm,
think in Hearthstone and Magic, monsters have these effects on them. They
mm,
call them in Magic keyword abilities. This guy will have Death Touch. This guy will have First Strike. This guy will have Flying,
yeah.
and it creates a. I guess these cards have different combat value depending on the board state. Like a monster with flying when you're at low life points is incredibly threatening, right? Because that monster is going to kill you in two swings. A monster that has an activated ability to draw a card is a much more threatening effect late in the game when you're in a board stall.
Mm.
So you kind of have this dynamic, interesting kind of situation when you both have monsters arrayed, not just in terms of combat, but also in terms of these static or activated abilities on the
Well, I still
monsters.
think that this distinction is important to what you're saying as well, because,
Hmm.
for example, a monster that draws a card every turn is very powerful, and so normally for its mana cost, it'll be quite small. Like you might play a 3 mana 1/1, something really small, but it has a
Hmm.
powerful effect. That
Hmm.
thing is not a threat as much in Yu-Gi-Oh! Because I can just play a monster and attack
Kill it.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, which means that I think the ability to play value monsters and get value off out of them turn after turn is much easier in Magic than it is in Yu-Gi-Oh! I tried to build a deck around doing that and was kind of
Hmm.
successful. So I played a card called Scrap Iron Scarecrow, I think it was, which is a
This is the one that flips face down after activating it, right?
yeah, so it's a trap. When your opponent attacks, you can activate it to stop the attack, and then you actually don't send it to the discard pile like normal. You just set it down, and you can use it again and again every turn. And
Hmm.
I was able to use that to protect value monsters and kind of get, increasing value off them. Like I had Royal Magical Library, which is a card that whenever you get counters, like whenever you play spells, it gets a counter, and then you can remove 3 counters to draw a card. So if you can protect it, you can draw a bunch of cards. This worked for a bunch of the game and then stopped working as they got stronger spells and traps, but it was somewhat possible, but for sure I agree with you that it is less a part of the game than it is in Magic.
Yeah, and what the way I would describe this at a big level system is that I think that in Magic the Gathering, the systems at play here, so your combat systems and stuff like that, the rules are a lot more complicated. There's a lot more going on in terms of
Mm,
blocking and double blocking and keyword abilities and all that kind of thing. I think in Yu-Gi-Oh, the complexity comes from the cards themselves, like the actual individual cards and the text written on the cards allows for complexity chains and tutors that are more complicated than most decks in Magic. Now, I would say the most complicated deck in Yu-Gi-Oh is probably about as complicated as the most complicated deck in Magic. So I don't want to turn this into a dick waving contest, but
mm.
basically, modern Yu-Gi-Oh I think is complicated because of what's written on the cards, whereas I think that modern Magic is complicated because of their baseline systems.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. There's also, I think, in terms of like deck knowledge, in order to play in the current format, you need to understand the other decks very well because most of the game it become like as the power level has gone up, it's moved towards and Magic does this in its high power formats too. It
Hmm.
moves away from slow grindy value strategies towards like high impact combo like in my first turn I do all this crazy stuff And because all the decks are kind of doing that to some degree, and each part of the combo has bits that are weak to interaction or disruption, you kind of need to know those quote unquote choke points of each deck in the format in order to not lose. um, that kind of burden of knowledge, I think, is a bit less in Magic to some degree.
What do you think of Yu-Gi-Oh as being? Would you describe? Would you say it's accurate to say Yu-Gi-Oh is all combo decks? Like in Magic, we have different archetypes. We have aggressive, beatdown decks that are just trying to kill you as quick as possible. We have mid-range decks that play a combination of interaction and value creatures.
hmm,
You have control decks which play no creatures at all in some instances, or like one creature whose goal is to basically just counter everything the opponent does.
yep.
And then we have combo decks. And just from my experience with this game, it feels like to some degree, literally every single deck in Yu-Gi-Oh is a combo deck.
Yeah,
Is that an accurate assessment?
yeah, I would say that there is a lot more combo stuff happening in Yu-Gi-Oh! At a baseline. There are still slow control decks. There are still aggressive I kill you on turn 2 kinds of decks. There are still what I would describe as grindy mid-range decks, and there are hard combo decks. But I all think they are all tinted through that combo lens. Like to
That's a good way to put it.
some degree, every deck, has lines of play where they play one card and that searches another card and that searches another card. And, super combo decks will, with one card, play 30 monsters or something crazy. And then if you manage to destroy their board, they will just lose. And then there's like mid range decks which will turn after turn do smaller combos but never really run out of gas. So these kinds of things exist. I would say it's much less of the game. It kind of all blends together a bit more than it does in Magic, whereas I think aggro, control, and mid range and combo are more well defined, isolated ideas in that.
I do have another idea with this, James, and this is moving away from mechanics a little bit. What do you feel about the aesthetic of Yu-Gi-Oh decks, the flavor
Mm,
of the decks? And while on the surface, this might seem like a not super important thing, I actually think this is critical. You do develop an emotional relationship with your deck as
yeah,
you play it over and over again. I swear to God, it's true. You grow to love or hate, but mostly love the deck you're playing. And I think that something Yu-Gi-Oh does really well, and maybe this is because of the strong tribal element. I do think that decks in Yu-Gi-Oh do have a very strong flavor and aesthetic identity, to some degree, even stronger than Magic the Gathering.
yeah. I think that a lot of the early card pool did this thing where it had very striking, very dramatic sorts of visual aesthetics and poses for their monsters. Is very like anime inspired. They have very simple backgrounds most of the time, whereas even early Magic, I think, was more focused on there's a real world that's being represented in the cards. So your monsters will be in a known place in the plane that they're in, and they'll have some sort of relationship to the other monsters. In Yu-Gi-Oh, monsters tend to be drawn, not all of them. They've actually made a bunch of lore archetypes recently that does what Magic does, but at
Mm.
least in the cards in 2011, you get lots of very monsters that are kind of driven via their striking visual direction more than their place in the world. And I think that leads to a lot of really cool looking cards, honestly, but maybe less, it's like more immersive.
I have to say, tributing and fusion summoning, it feels very cool. Like it feels cool to combine two monsters into a mega monster. It always feels cool, and I think it always will be cool. Um,
Rituals, too.
I,
I always
yeah,
loved it,
rituals
yeah.
too. Like, I think Yu-Gi-Oh captures this sense of sorcery to it, or witchcraft, or whatever you want to call it, better than Magic does, and maybe old Magic is closer to what Yu-Gi-Oh was to some degree. But I think that Magic the Gathering, in a lot of ways, kind of got this isn't necessarily a bad direction, but it was a departure. It got very caught up in its storytelling and world building, right?
Mm,
It wanted us to go to a place, and then that place or plane of existence, there would be a story to be told in that place with faction leaders and armies going against each other and different tribes fighting each other and so on and so forth. But because of that, it kind of became more grounded
yeah,
and understandable and relatable. Yu-Gi-Oh is weird, and while it does sometimes slide into pure goofiness and silliness with the names of some of these monsters, it does lean more into eldritch horror territory a
it-
lot of the time. These monsters are genuine monsters. When Magic is at its best, I think that it does exceed anything in Yu-Gi-Oh! Like the Phyrexian planes, for example,
yeah,
are genuinely fucking terrifying. But then you have like the whole goofy horror realm it did recently, where it was more like haunted house themed, and it didn't quite land for me because it wasn't as sincere
yeah.
about its content. It more wanted to make cool, funny references than maybe scare you.
Yeah, I do find the modern direction Magic is taking is really leaning hard into that style of writing that got pretty popularized with a lot of the Marvel movies, where
Hmm.
nothing is earnest anymore, which kind of takes a lot away from me. Yu-Gi-Oh actually did recently start doing, like, you know how in the show it's kind of like there's a world with people in it who play card games, whereas
Hmm.
in Magic the cards show worlds that are kind of separate
Yep.
to our world. They started doing that a bit in Yu-Gi-Oh in the last decade or so, and I think, you know, they're aimed at younger audiences compared to Magic's storylines, but I think they've done a reasonably good job of having the storylines they've created be sincere and have characters that go around the world and, encounter other, people and worlds. That was interesting, and I think they did it better than a lot of the recent Magic storylines have been, which have felt very, I don't know. I don't think the Yu-Gi-Oh ones are particularly like there's no like deep or interesting story there, but because it's earnest, it feels less trite to me. I don't know.
I don't want to be too dismissive of Magic storytelling either. I
Some of
think
it's
that
quite
it
good.
does. Yeah, I think some of it is quite good, but it's just for me, Yu-Gi-Oh captures this sense of mysticism, I
Yeah,
guess,
yeah.
that I think Magic the Gathering has lost. Mysticism and sorcery, it gives it a more distinct flavor to me than a lot of Magic stuff, which I think can blend together, to be honest, sometimes.
I think it's a time period thing. I think Yu-Gi-Oh has lost some of that over the years. I think the older cards in both games are more reflective of that than they are in the modern day. I think they both kind of have their issues where, the original game was created by a bunch of nerds, right, who liked things like, for Magic it was Wizards of the Coast, people making stuff that was obviously heavily inspired by role playing games. I think some of that has been lost for almost all card games in the last 20 years.
Yeah, there's been a sanitization, right? And I
Yeah,
mean, I understand it because, believe it or not, the satan like it seems crazy to say today, but these games were part of the satanic panic of the 90s and early
it's crazy
2000s,
stuff, right?
where a bunch of church groups essentially were like, "Oh, this is a gateway to Satan," which am not a fan of. I won't go into it, but yeah, not a big fan of that. But
Yeah,
yeah, it's as a consequence, it's been sanitized and it's a lot more family friendly now. And
yeah.
so be it. We're grown ups playing a children's card game. We have to be accepting of that to some degree.
Card games on motorcycles, baby.
James, listen, I don't want to spend too long on this because we could literally talk about this for hours and
We
hours,
could,
but
yeah.
we are here to review a video game. Do you have any other major conceptual things about Yu you want to touch on?
That pretty much hits the notes for me that I want to talk about. We've got a gameplay with rapidly changing board states. You've got a big focus on archetypes and tribal cards, lots of consistency, no mana, an extra deck, sense of style, and dramatic art design. That's pretty much all of my notes for this. So it's probably a good idea to actually talk about the video game. So we'll do a quick music break because we've got an hour already. And I actually thought that the music in this game was really good. Surprisingly, I wasn't expecting much. I figure that these sorts of yearly releases don't get a huge amount of budget in them, so I was expecting like okay music. There was some like banger tracks on this game, so I wanted to share my favorite in particular, which is the first battle theme. So this game actually, it's set in the 5D's universe, which is like I would kind of describe it as like a dystopian cyberpunk sort of setting. It takes place in this like grungy city. But the start of 2011 actually takes place in this like spaghetti western kind of area to, spice things up. And I thought that the duel theme for this area was awesome. It's called The Wilderness of Duelists. So let's have a listen to that, and then we'll get started on talking about what it's actually like to play, this video game. Alrighty, that was Wilderness of Duelist, which was a great track. I always love hearing it. Sorry, I forgot to ask, Pat, what did you think of the music?
So I'm afraid we have another Fire Emblem situation, James, where as a turn-based game, I use the speed up function on this game a lot. I played this game initially at 2 times speed, and then after a couple of hours at 4 times speed. And as such, playing with music was not an option for me. So I did not listen to the music. So I have to say I'm guilty. I cannot give you a comment on the validity or enjoyment of this music because I played without it. Because listening to it at 4 times speed is not an enjoyable experience.
Yeah, I used speed up myself. I bound it to a key so I could turn it off when I wanted to. I generally found that it was very good. Like compared to I was expecting like nothing and got something quite enjoyable. My only criticism is a criticism I have of pretty much any deck building game, which is please, for the love of God, have more than one music track that plays when you are making a deck. If I spend half an hour making a deck and you have a 2 minute loop, it is going to drive me insane and I'll turn the sound off while I'm building my deck.
I just will say in general, having the ability to speed this game up to 4 times makes it
A lot
way
better.
better to emulate than to actually play the original. For any of these turn-based games, a speed up function dramatically improves the experience.
Yeah.
Particularly because the AI sometimes thinks for, I don't know, 40 seconds in real time. So making that 10 seconds instead of 40 seconds is an absolute lifesaver.
I was horrified in my first duel. The AI took a turn that was like a literal 2 minutes think while I was holding the speed button.
Mm.
That never happened again, ever, but like when that happened in the first duel, I was like, oh no, what garbage game have I picked? This is gonna be miserable, but it's normally not that bad. But I agree, it is more palatable with a bit of a boost.
Even if you don't get the music, I still think it is well worth emulating this and jamming up that speed. The trade off is well worth. Yeah, I would say this was even more of an issue in Fire Emblem, but here it still helps a lot. Okay, so it's an hour in, as James said, but it's time we actually start talking about the video game because this is not a discussion on Yu-Gi-Oh! The card game. It is a discussion on a specific video game. And I'll say the title one more time. It is Yu-Gi-Oh! 5DS World Championship 2011 over the Nexus. Dear God. This is a card game that was first released for the Nintendo DS in 2011. It uses an original story for the first half of the game where you play as a random young person who dreams of being a motorcycle duelist. After fighting a lot of people in regular duels, turns out you had a dad that used to be a cool motorcycle duelist, and then that gives you a motorcycle so you can become a motorcycle duelist. Then there are three magic people from the future who are trying to save the world by going back in time and destroying the city because the motorcycle energy is bad and leads to the destruction of the world. So they need to kill everyone in the city to save the world. Apparently, the first half is original, and the second half of this story is actually taken straight from the anime. Have you seen the motorcycle anime at all?
I've watched the first maybe 10, 15 episodes, but
Okay.
that's well before any of this becomes relevant. So I had met a lot of the characters already, but hadn't, like the rest of the plot was new to me.
Yeah, so you start off in this town, and it's all like, as James said, it was like this old Western town, and this is all stuff that is not from the show. It's just its own unique thing. But then you start to interact with characters from the show, and it kind of lines up with the anime as it moves to this conclusion. So, presumably, these three magical people from the future that all look very silly are all part of the anime, and it does feel very anime-esque. James, before, like, I don't have much to say about the story, but I did want to talk to you first a little bit about, I guess, the lore and world building or background
Yeah.
of Yu-Gi-Oh! Because while I think that the story here is kind of whatever, I do think that there is a lot to actually be said for the way the world is constructed in Yu-Gi-Oh! Both good and bad.
Yep. So I guess you're primarily talking about how in the quote unquote real world of the show, everything is about playing the card game, right? Like
Yes.
every little thing, the entire world is based around the existence of the card game.
You really need to view the world of Yu-Gi-Oh! As an alternate dimension to Earth. It is tempting when you first encounter this, to think of it as, this could be our world. This is Earth, and card games are really big, and this is like a fictional story or a mystical story taking place on Earth. But it isn't really. In the world of Yu-Gi-Oh!, card games determine everything, and card games seem to be the central focus of everyone's life. All the shows on TV are about card games. James, tell me, what happens if you commit a crime and a police officer chases you in the world of Yu-Gi-Oh?
The police officer on his motorbike has this program built into his bike or his dual disc that forces criminals to duel him, and if they lose the duel, they are taken to prison. But apparently, if you win the duel, you can get away with
Yeah,
crime.
this
So,
is the world of Yu-Gi-Oh. So, and this is taken to such an extreme that I would say it's distinct from other animes. Like, the big one that comes to mind is Pokemon. In Pokemon, Pokemon are everywhere, right? And Pokemon are the center of the world, but they make a lot of effort to integrate Pokemon into like real world stuff. So if you are running a moving company and your job is to move things from house to house, you'll have these big, strong Machoke Pokemon to help lift furniture. Or at the hospital, they have Chanseys, Pokemon that specialize in healing to help heal Pokemon and humans.
Mm.
That you can't really integrate card game playing in the same way into your world, but nonetheless, it's still the primary focus of everything.
Yeah, see, in Pokemon, I can my immersion kind of works. I can believe that the world is like that.
Mm.
In Yu-Gi-Oh, you're just constantly in this state of suspension of disbelief, and like they do play it very straight, but I still think there's like this, undercurrent of it's a big joke kind of. But they never make light of it, so
Mm.
it's very absurd. Which kind of makes it entertaining. I think that's like half the point,
I
right? Is
I
getting
agree.
entertainment out of the
See,
ridiculousness.
this is the key. In the world of Yu-Gi-Oh, as absolutely ridiculous and stupid as it is, it's played 100% straight. There is complete sincerity and commitment to its bit, and it never makes light of it or jokes about it. Everyone is in on it 100% and no one questions it. And I think that's maybe why it functions on some level. Yu-Gi-Oh is endearing because it commits to its ridiculousness, and you can become immersed with that alone because everyone is so dramatic and engaged and involved with the stakes of the show.
And a lot of the main characters are very serious people too.
Yes.
Like they have these like constant frowns on their face, like this duel will cost someone their life. Like it's very in like an intense kind of seriousness at all times
I
almost.
will say listen, I've only really watched the early seasons with the main with Yugi, but there is a fair bit of like genuine horror integrated into
Yeah.
it, which also underwrites the seriousness of the show with these dark malevolent spirits and evil shit happening in the shadow realm. It's not a happy go lucky show in a lot of instances.
I also want to point out that all that Shadow Realm stuff is mostly anime original in the Western release. Did you know that?
No, I didn't. What do you just die in the
Okay, so if you read the manga in the Western show, Kaiba will like swing his hat out, or like some evil character will swing their hand out and be like, "You're banished to the Shadow Realm." In the manga, Kaiba pulls out a gun and shoots someone dead.
what? I mean, I
Yeah.
know I knew about because in the abridged series, the little Karibo is constantly making fun of like the invisible guns, and there are all of these silly fist fights off screen where he says it is
Yeah.
implied you're punching me. But so what happens? He wins the duel and shoots someone.
I think so,
Okay,
yeah.
nice.
I need to read it, but yeah, it's like a lot darker than. Like, I actually think that the Western release is more entertaining because of the stuff they
Mm.
introduced, but yeah, it's super, super edgy to begin with.
Okay.
Um,
So James, that's my bit. I don't actually hate the premise, but I do to this day, I still am not a fan of the motorcycles. Here's the thing about strategy games and turn-based games. On the surface, these things are very boring. And truth be told, they are boring. You have a lot of the time you have two people sitting in complete silence. For example, chess. Chess is the best example of this. What could be more boring than two people sitting aside from one another for 6 hours in complete silence? Sometimes they spend 30 minutes thinking about what move to make, right? But
hmm.
the thing is, for fans of these games, there actually is a lot which is exciting. There, you've got the strategy, you've got a lot of tension, you've got all these possibilities, you've got this battle of minds. And for people who are into it, it is exciting and engaging and filled with lots of tension. Something that from the outside might not be obvious at all, right? The addition of motorcycles to Yu-Gi-Oh feels like they are adding something that is the polar opposite of what makes these games special. in order to make it more exciting. I don't think you need motorcycles to make Yu-Gi-Oh more exciting. I think that by itself, it is a very exciting and fun game. I see the benefit from an anime perspective because it actually
Mm.
allows you to do a lot more from an animation perspective to make the screen look more exciting. But I don't think it actually does anything to make the card game more exciting. And that would be my problem with it. It's shifting the focus away from the card game to something which I have no real interest in at all. So to me, the motorcycles, and I know that fans of this series might not agree, which is fine, but to me, the motorcycles don't actually add, and I think they detract from the core enjoyment of what Yu-Gi-Oh is all about.
Specifically, I think that this video game is worse because of the inclusion of the motorcycle stuff. I felt like the developers felt the need to shoehorn a lot of that stuff in, which kind of ultimately leads to a bunch of half-baked mini games that are just less fun than dueling regularly.
Mm.
Maybe if they put more effort into it, it could have been more exciting. Maybe if they just left it as like thematic fluff and didn't implement a mini game or something. I don't know. I kind of feel that when I watched the episodes of the show, it did lead to some dramatic tension and made the show enjoyable to watch. I think that the inclusion in the video game actively makes it worse in the long run. And we could talk about that a bit more
It
later.
it
But
it doesn't help
it,
that the latter half of the game is all the like, the climax of this game is all motorcycle duels, which
yeah.
are worse than the regular duels. So it feels like the longer you play the game, the worse it gets, and that's because of the motorcycles.
Yeah, we need to come back to this because I think we need to talk about the structure of the game and
Mm,
then how they tried to integrate that into it.
yeah.
But keep that in mind. They did try, and it's not very successful. So I don't know about you, but my initial impression of the game when starting was extremely high. I think that the first hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours was very strong in terms of the way they set the game up and the way they presented it to you.
Mm.
So basically what happens is you're in this town and you make your character, right? You pick some different hairstyles, you pick a face, you pick age, gender, etc., and you make an avatar and you play as this person. There weren't a heap of options, which I thought was odd, but we'll get back to that in a second. So then you're dunked into the town, and you go to find your friends, and your friends are playing the card game, and you duel them, right? So you've got a deck, you fight them, that's fun. And then after the duel, your friend says, "Hey, I've got these puzzles for you. Would you like to try them?" So you say yes. And it puts you into a duel where there is a already established board state. You have a hand of specific cards. Your opponent has like 3,400 life or something, and your goal is win in one turn with the board state. And there are 5 of these that get progressively harder. I would say
The
that,
fifth one's impossible for what it's worth. Like, you have to be some kind of Yu-Gi-Oh mega nerd to even attempt to solve the fifth one.
yeah, but you only have to solve 3 to
Yeah.
progress. I actually thought this was a decent way to introduce the mechanics of the game. There was a couple like you need to understand the idea of chaining cards together to get through the third puzzle, I think.
Mm.
And it gives you a hint. Like if you get stuck, you can ask, and then she'll tell you how to do it, and then you have to do it, so you learn the mechanic. I thought that was fun. And then shortly after that, they open a card store in the town, and they hold a tournament where they give the contestants pre-made decks, and you duel each other.
Pre-made endgame decks, like
Yeah, they
fully
give you
powered
good.
decks.
Yeah, they give you good decks, like actual good decks. Like decks people would have played like for real in the card game during those metagames, right? And that I think was a really good idea because the power level of your starting deck is well below that, but it gives you an idea of what you're eventually trying to get to. And there's like 10 decks, and you get to play with 3 of them. I thought that all of this intro, you duel very quickly, then you do some cool puzzles, then you do this cool rental deck, then you get a bunch of points to buy cards and try to make your deck better, and then you just do a heap more dueling. I thought that intro was really solid.
I agree. I actually really enjoyed the intro of this game, but even back here, I was having concerns,
Mm,
specifically with the overworld. The
yeah,
idea of moving around this town, interacting with characters, picking things off the ground, because it feels really half baked to me. Like,
yeah,
as I was playing through this, I was like, I would prefer if this was just menus. Even with Mega Man Battle Network, with all of its mazes and stuff, there was a lot more devotion, I feel, to building a more complex overworld with diverse
yes,
shops, areas to explore, or you're given Pokemon Overworld. Pokemon Overworld has, trainers and shops and items to find and all of this cool stuff. Here in 2011, it is extremely bare bones. These areas are tiny. The stuff you have to find barely matters and is uninteresting. It's a very basic place in terms of roaming around and interacting with people. And it's so basic that I think that pure menu based would have been an improvement, in my opinion. I don't think you actually get much enjoyment from being an avatar in this world moving around.
I agree with that. I think that the 3D overworld is pretty underbaked. Like, you don't have much freedom to explore. There isn't much interesting to find. It kind of just serves as a vessel for duelists to stand in because,
Or
as we
cutscenes to
mentioned,
play. It's background
yeah,
environment
yeah.
for cutscenes to play.
Yeah, and as we mentioned, everyone in this setting duels, right? And that is true in this game. Literally every NPC in the game you can duel, I'm pretty sure, other than maybe like one of the shop assistants. But for the most part, you can duel your grandpa, you can duel everyone in the street, and they all have different decks. So I want to get this out of the way early. I'm a bit torn on this game because I think that all of the fluff, all of the overworld, all of the cutscene, the story, everything around that is quite poor. However, I think they have done a really good job of integrating the card game and having you do lots of duels, which is the fun part of the game. So for example, this game contains over 4,200 cards, which is nuts, right? And they all
It's
work.
insane. Like this,
Yeah,
thi- this is really astounding. Like Mega Man Battle Network might have had, like if I had to estimate, it would be between 500 and 1,000, if it even has that many.
I think there's about 300 on average in each game. There's 304 in the first Battle Network. So
Yes,
yeah, 4,000 is crazy, right?
it's completely mad, and I mean, it's only because of because it's the nth game in the series that this is even possible.
Mm,
But it's not just that it has so many cards; it's also that it has a banned and restricted list, which is critical, right? This game, Yu-Gi-Oh, has been play tested by real players for 8 years by this point, right? At 7 or 8
yep.
years, and they have banned and restricted the most broken shit. That doesn't mean there's still not broken stuff you can do, but the point is that this is a somewhat balanced single player game card game. Unheard of. Like you will not find this because you don't have 7 to 8 years of balance testing in your normal single player card games.
I think that fact also has benefits for the way that they've designed NPC duels and the decks that NPCs
Mm,
have.
really good point.
Yeah, this is my favorite part of the game, and I actually think that even with a lot of other stuff being very disappointing, the fact that this specifically is so good nudges me towards, I enjoyed the game overall, and that is that NPCs have very coherent strategies in their decks. They are capable, their AI is capable of playing those decks to a certain degree, and at each stage of the game, NPCs have appropriately powered decks for the
For the
deck you're
most part.
probably, yeah, for the most part. There's some spikes here and there, but there are a few. I'm going to say over 100 NPCs, right? That each have their own deck and their own strategy built around that
And
deck.
I would say by the mid game, you can build a deck that is capable of beating anything as well. There's
Yeah,
just a bit of a difficult bridge from your starting deck to a good deck.
I really enjoyed this. I really liked playing against. There was a bunch of decks I noticed that were based off real meta decks. There was one called Nurse Burn that an NPC had. Nurse Burn is a strategy where you play this monster that says if your opponent would gain life points, they instead lose life points. And then they play this trap that says your opponent gains 3,000 life points. And yeah, they flipped three of them on me, and I just died in one turn. It was very funny.
Yeah, and there's a
Um,
huge variety of archetypes here. I played against like a turbo fog deck that was
yeah,
basically trying to prevent me from attacking. I played against decks which had monsters that attacked your life points directly, allowing you to skip attacking enemy monsters. I played against decks that would, you know, ritual summon some ridiculous monster on the first turn. Polymerization decks built around synchro summons, decks with our own even more specific weird conditions, graveyard reanimation decks, everything. There's probably well over 100 different enemy decks in this game because not only do you have the people that you encounter through the main campaign, there's also just 25 additional enemy decks that you can just access through the menus. It's bonkers, and I agree with everything you said, James. The effort that's been put into not only having these decks but having the AI pilot them semi competently is really impressive. I was impressed by this, and if they were going to dedicate their time and resources to any one aspect of the game, I'm kind of glad they did it for this.
absolutely. One other thing I thought was cool, I didn't do too much of this because I found the repetitive dueling a bit tedious, is that when you play against the same NPC a bunch of times, they actually upgrade their deck a couple of times. So you actually get more value out of each of them a little bit. I think they probably should have just upgraded it every time you beat them up until your 3 wins, but I liked that as an idea. And if I was maybe a little kid with the game, I would probably engage with that more.
Okay, so
Um,
that's the enemy deck side of it. Let's talk about your deck side of it. And this isn't the progression system, James. We will get into that in a moment. I want to talk more about the UI and in terms of options in terms of building your own deck. How did you find this process? Did you build many decks over the course of the game, or did you mainly stick to one?
I built a bunch of decks. I found because this is a DS title, you have a touch screen, which you use a lot in both the UI, and which
Well
works really
suited for a
well.
mouse, right?
Mouse and keyboard, yeah.
Yeah.
So I found the actual act of playing the game quite easy.
Yep.
It has it has some nice features. For example, normally when your opponent does a card and you have a card that you can react with, it will pop up with a prompt that says, "Do you want to respond?" One thing you can do is if you hold the back button, it will automatically say no, so you don't have to keep pressing no if you know you're not going to respond. Stuff like that. It's quite easy to, when pop ups appear, if you kind of click around the pop ups, sometimes they'll close so you can still view the board state if you need to view a decision. I found the layout pretty easy to work with, to be honest. Maybe it could be a bit snappier in terms of animations, but speed up fixes that. There wasn't a whole lot of problems I had. One thing I did like, if your opponent has a trap that turns into a monster, the trap zone becomes unusable and they visually represent that. They actually
Hmm.
don't even do that in Master Duel very well, so they actually have something better in this older game.
Yeah, I think the UI in terms of playing the game is fantastic. It's not as good as Magic Arena, like for example, where your opponent is thinking, you can't like go through that graveyard and use that, kind of like interact with the UI.
Yeah.
Your opponent's in that thinking mode. But for the most part, it works really, really well and actually worked better than I was expecting for like a single player Yu-Gi-Oh game. It's very functional and it does everything you want it to do. And very quickly you come to grips with it. So, like I said before, the only thing that could be annoying is the speed of the game. But when
Mm,
you put the game to 4 times speed for emulating it, which is how I play it and how I'd recommend playing it, it is a much, much better experience. So,
yeah.
where I
I
had,
also,
oh, sorry, go on.
also, just to talk about the dual screen a little more,
Mm.
there was a couple of little embellishes that I quite enjoyed. One was the music getting more excited or more dire, depending on if you're winning or losing. That was nice inclusion. I liked that for every, like, there's a bunch of faces, hair, gender, etc. that you can choose for your player avatar in the actual duels, because you're a 3D character in the world. Your 3D character actually has a 2D, like, anime looking character that appears in the duel screen, and when they attack or get hit, they actually have a bunch of different expressions based on all the combinations that you picked. So I thought that was a really, I wasn't expecting that, but it added a little bit to the duels for me, which I thought was cool.
A lot of it is context sensitive buttons as well. Like with your extra deck, if you hover over your extra deck, it will tell you if you can summon something from it. So,
Mm,
like for me, particularly when I was learning, extra deck is 15 cards. I've got 10 cards in there. I don't know what 6-star monsters I have available to summon when I have 6 power on the field, but I can click on the summon from extra deck and it will list my 6-star monsters. Absolute lifesaver and much easier than having to like click through 15
mm.
cards to check which ones I can actually summon. It automated that process for me. So there's a lot of quality of life features like that that particularly help as a new player that makes the experience a lot smoother.
Yeah, and like your graveyard lights up if there's an effect you can activate in it. Yeah, it's just really nice.
If you
Yeah.
have cards that can special summon from the hand when certain conditions are met, it will demonstrate, yes, you can special summon this one. Like I played a lot of Chaos Sorcerer, which requires you to banish a dark and light card from your graveyard. It will show, yes, you can summon it now. So I'm like, cool, I know I have a dark and light monster in the graveyard. I don't have to like constantly go through it or click on it to confirm before I can summon it. Moving over to something which wasn't as crash hot to me, but I don't like. I'm not like super mad about this. It's the deck building. I kind
Yeah,
of
there
feel
was
like it did the best job it could, but it's really hard to have a robust deck building system with 4,300 cards without some kind of search function.
yeah, no search function was a pain. There was filtering, like
Lots of
what I'm
filtering.
lots of filtering. Normally what I did was I would be like, okay, this monster type sorted alphabetically, or you can press a letter and it'll take you down to that letter and you can look at all the J cards or whatever.
It even has some filtering in terms of effect, like it has graveyard bound. So this does something when it enters the graveyard, or gain life points, or direct life point damage. So it has shitloads of filtering options,
It
but
didn't have flip. That really annoyed me. I wanted to search
interesting.
all the flip monsters. It didn't have them. That was annoying. It also it had one nice feature I liked a lot, which was if you have an archetype, let's say I'm playing Armed Dragon, right? And you have Armed Dragon level 3 and Armed Dragon level 7 and Armed Dragon level 10.
Hmm.
If you have Armed Dragon level 3 in your deck, you can click View Related Cards and it will show you the level 7, the level 10. From there, you can click Add to Deck,
Oh,
which
nice.
was a
I didn't
big.
I didn't find that feature actually.
Yeah, one thing I could not find, which was really annoying, was if I have 3 copies of a card and one of them's in my deck and I want to add a second one, I couldn't figure out how to go add second without going into the collection and finding it manually.
Yeah, neither could I.
That was the number one criticism I have, I think. Yeah.
What I ended up doing a lot of was I would Google Cyber Dragon deck and then see what
Mm,
Google Spot out put out. And what was interesting about this is that I couldn't just net deck, right? Because it would spit out some deck from 2022, and this is the
Yeah.
2011 format, and it would just be filled with cards. I had no idea if they were legal or not. I'd just look through them and go, "Oh, I wonder if this game's card's legal. Maybe I can add just this card." But I'd use it as like a way to give me a little bit of inspiration and direction. What I will say is really cool about playing this format, this 2011 format, is that it's like Mega Man Battle Network 3 in that you kind of have to do it by yourself a little bit. Like you can
Yeah.
get guidance and inspiration online, but you can't really, or maybe there is a way and I didn't figure out, but you can't really like find a net deck for the format. You kind of have to puzzle it out a little bit, and it
Mm.
encourages you experimenting and trying things. I often would use the restricted card list to guide me as to what was overpowered. I'm like, you know, play one copy of this. This card's probably pretty good. So let's throw
Yeah.
that in there and give it a try. Um, so I think that from the perspective of creativity and coming up with ideas and, you know, trying cool new things and slamming it together and it working pretty well, the deck building is fun, but I feel like the UI just cannot possibly be robust enough on a Nintendo DS for this to really work. You need a full size computer monitor with a mouse and a search function
Yeah.
for this really to be approaching anything close to the modern games. So yeah, I thought it was okay to bad, but I don't I'm not really mad about it. I just kind of
Yeah, me too.
accepted this as a limitation of what a Nintendo DS is capable of. James, you ready to talk about progression systems?
Yeah, oh boy. Okay, this is okay. So I think that the motorcycle stuff and the story and the overworld aren't very good. However, don't actually think that my enjoyment of the game decreases that much from those things being bad, because the thing that I care about the most is, can I make fun decks? Yes. Can I duel? Yes. Is the dueling easy? Yes. Are the opponents fun and challenging?
And
Yes.
have
Uh,
variety? Yeah.
Yep. Is there a lot of dueling? Yes. Is it easy for me to just jump into the game, find a random NPC and duel and ignore all the other stuff? Yes. All of that is super easy. There's 4,000 cards in the game, so even if the story is literally the worst story ever written, even if the music is the worst music ever, even if the overworld sucks, because I personally enjoy playing Yu-Gi-Oh! A lot, and because this game does a good job of facilitating that, it's actually like, there's really not. Like, the game can't be made that bad by those other fluff things being super bad, right?
The core mechanics here are excellent. That's how I
Yeah,
describe it in general
yeah.
video game terms.
And that kind of elevates the experience, regardless of how poorly done the other things are. Because the core mechanics are so solid, we have this, long lived card game backing it up. It's still fun. What I will say, however, is the progression system, I do think actively detracts from the experience and the game and my enjoyment of playing the game, because I think it is quite poor, and I think there was this huge opportunity to do this much better. It is really frustrating trying to build certain strategies over others. What do I mean by that? So in Yu-Gi-Oh, we've talked about how you can have strategies based around fusing monsters, for example. And all fusion strategies require A, the fusion monster in your extra deck, B, the two monsters you fuse to make the monster, and C, the spell card that initiates the fusion. And the same is true for ritual, right? You need a critical mass of cards, or you just can't do the strategy. I found it really hard to find all the pieces of the puzzle sometimes to make these more complex special summon focusing strategies, because the way that you get cards in this game is simple. You open packs. When you duel things, they give you money, and you can spend money on packs which you open to get random cards. Now, there are lots of packs in the store, lots. There's like, like over 50, 60 packs. The first 4 packs have about 200 possible cards in each of them. There's multiple different rarities, so some are rarer than others. Each pack you open gives you 5 cards, which means that if you need your fusion spell and it's only in this big pack, you have to open a lot of packs to find it. It gets better with other strategies because the later packs tend to only have 20 or 30 cards in them total, so getting all the cards from those packs is okay, but the core cards for like fusion and ritual are really annoying to get. So I found myself making decks that were just filled with good cards, and I found it frustrating because all of the NPCs have these amazing thematic decks with these cool strategies, but I can't really build a deck that's that cohesive without grinding for like a lot of hours.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because this is less about power level and more about building a synergistic
Yeah.
deck. And that's, as a player, I feel like you care a lot more about that. The frustrating thing isn't that your deck is weaker than theirs. The frustrating thing is that their deck has synergy to a degree that you can't possibly get close to. I wouldn't care if my deck was a little bit weaker than theirs, but I still had this cool game plan I got to execute. Instead, in the early games, you're just kind of playing value cards. And it's like, I want to do the cool shit. I don't want to just summon a dude.
I actually think that it's a good thing that the early game is like this because once you get to the point of making synergistic decks, you can't go back. So I think it's good to have this small period at the beginning where you
Yeah,
make decks like this,
that's
which is
fair, yeah.
fine. Um,
But bridging to that's really difficult.
yeah, so there is 2 other ways of getting cards in this game. One is finding them on the ground, most of which so the cards on the ground are either unplayable garbage or broken in half cards. There's not really, you don't generally just get like solid playables. You find worthless cards and insane cards, no in between. That's fine. And then NPCs, whenever you finish dueling them, it starts this match 2 mini game where they show you 9 face down cards and you have to flip them up. And if you get 2 that are the same, you get that card. And if you don't, it ends the match 3. But next time you win the duel, you start off again where you were.
If you remember.
Yeah. So I thought that what they were going to do here is that they would include all of the core cards that were specific to that NPC's strategy in those reward cards, and then you could, like, let's say you fight an NPC and you really like their deck. I thought that if I just dueled them a lot, I would be able to make their deck. That's not the case. Lots of the time you get unrelated cards that are garbage or whatever, and you kind of have to level them up to get those better cards. I don't know. I found it really hard to access the cards I wanted.
There is one more way to get cards, though, James. Something that you messaged me
Yeah.
about that I had no idea. The password system.
Yeah, so every card in the game has a password. It's not enough to just know the password. You have to have either a copy of the card already unlocked, or you have to have the pack unlocked and you have to have opened over 80% of the cards in that pack, at which point you can just Google the password, put it in, pay some money, get the card.
And to be clear, Googling the password is the only way to get the password as far as James and I are aware. You're not discovering these passwords in the world or fighting people for the passwords. You literally Google the password.
Yeah. Once we found that, I found it a little easier.
Much easier.
Unfortunately, yeah, much easier. Now, to get, so, like, you don't get all the packs automatically added to the shop. Some of them are added, you have to beat requirements. The most common one is
Story
if you,
progression.
yeah, story progression, or you have to beat either one NPC or a combination of NPC exactly 3 times. I was reading a guide at one point and it said, if you play this game, you should pretty much always duel every single NPC you encounter exactly 3 times. And if you
Is
do
it 3
that,
times or 3 wins?
3 wins,
So
yeah.
yeah, 3
Three
wins.
wins, you get all the packs in the game eventually. I discovered this information a bit late, unfortunately, so I missed a lot of packs, I think. But if you follow that advice and you are aware of the password system, I think you can mitigate this issue pretty dramatically. But I still think there is a lot that has been lost here by not including a more interesting progression system. Like, to me, the ideal thing would have been to have a bunch of thematic locations like Fusion Town and, Synchro Palace or something. And Fusion Town has all these Fusion decks NPCs in them, and you can get all the Fusion cards when you play duels there. Like, I feel the ability to target farm needs to be a bit higher.
There's so much you can do with a
Yeah,
progression system that is so much more imaginative than what is present here. In real life, Yu-Gi-Oh is a gacha game, just like Magic the Gathering is, just like most of these card games are, right? Where you open booster packs to get specific cards. But there is literally no reason for booster packs to actually be how you unlock cards in this game. There are, in addition to James's idea, there could be these like
it could just be
Yu-Gi-Oh
better
is so
shops.
Yu-Gi-Oh is so tribal, right? It's so archetype driven that they could have like, here's the dragon archetype and there's 80 possible cards, and if you select that as your preferred archetype, whenever you win duels, it automatically unlocks some cards from that archetype, right? So
Yeah,
as you duel, you are only unlocking cards to that archetype until that archetype is completed, and now you have that deck available after getting 10 to 15 wins or whatever it is, and now you have a cool new deck to try. You can select a new deck to start unlocking towards. As James said, you can have different shops. Different shops offer specific kinds of cards instead of just a shop with booster packs.
Yeah, the
um
weird thing is that there are multiple shops in the game, but the thing is, you can access the shop from the main menu,
yep, so there's no
and then
reason to
if
go
you
on them.
if you walk to the shops, they all go to the same shop anyway. Like they don't actually sell different thing. It's just weird.
So when you're playing this game, you kind of have to be like, all right, I'm going to build this archetype, and you start building towards it, and you Google and you experiment a bit, and that's all well and good. But it feels, playing this game, it feels like just this enormous missed opportunity, because if you
Mm.
put effort into a progression system that let you delve meaningfully into all these all archetypes, hell, if you had more based around renting decks out, like if more of the game was you be given more decks, if there were restrictions on the kind, it's like you can't bring your main deck, you can only borrow a deck. Mega Man Battle Network does this at some stage, I think, doesn't it? Where you get given
Yeah,
a deck to play. Like, all of this is stuff which exposes you to different cards and strategies and lets you play with it. Instead, you have this really slow, clunky system that really discourages you from trying out new stuff or even building towards what you want to build. It's very frustrating. Like, when I'm playing this game, it's a single player game that there's no money going into it. I should really have the opportunity to try 20 different decks. There are 100 decks in this game. Let me try 20 different decks. Push me towards playing with a bunch of different decks. That would be by far the most fun way to play this game. Instead, you end up probably playing 3 or 4, and then you just settle into a groove and kind of roll over the rest of the game. It's this huge wasted opportunity, and you just can feel the potential dripping out of this game from every pore. I find it so frustrating, James, because the game is, it could be so much more than what it is.
I'm so conflicted on this title, Patrick, because
Mm.
I genuinely have had a lot of fun playing this game, and I have played it a lot, right? Like, I played it way more than I needed to in order to do an effective review for the show, right?
I spend hours at nighttime in the CPU dual screen. It's just
Yeah.
menus where you just duel against. Spent
Yeah.
3 hours in a row just menuing through, just fighting again and again and again. I don't do that normally with our podcast games.
Yeah.
This is optional content.
And so, on the one hand, I'm having fun and I'm playing the game a lot and I want to play more. And on the other hand, I have this like in the back of my mind, I'm just constantly feeling like this could have been done a lot better, right?
I feel like this is the division between what an indie game would have done versus what this mainstream game did. They put so much effort into making this super robust mechanical base, but they didn't put
Yeah.
any thought into the trimmings around it, you know? The overworld and the motorbike stuff and the motorbike racing mini game, it's all just fluff garbage. It's like if they just made a good progression system, this game could be a 10 out of 10. Like it could just be a 10 out of 10
Yeah.
flawless classic that goes down in time as one of the greatest card games ever made. And I'm not exaggerating when I say this. The progression system is a difference between this being a 10 out of 10 and not being a 10 out of 10.
I think so too, which is very. But at the same time, like, at the time of this game's release, it was a yearly series. Like, they had 2008, 2009, 10, 11, you know. So, in a year's worth of development time, I'm not like. I get that they put all of their time into the core mechanics, and I think they made the right decision. It's just frustrating. It's super annoying.
Yeah, because the base here is rock solid. It's just there's no creativity. It's just like, yeah, just do booster packs. It's like fuck's sake.
Yeah.
The other problem is that a lot of the time you're after rare cards from the booster packs and you get
Yeah.
one rare card in a booster pack. There are other things they could have done as well, like dusting system, wild
Mm-hmm.
card system. There's shit they could have done that is done in modern card games, even very aggressively, and by aggressively I mean even in a bad way for the player, like you don't get many wild cards or you don't get much dust back. That's still better than the password system we have here. In those games you can still get the card you want. In this you can sometimes get the card you want and it still costs currency.
I forget. Magic Arena doesn't have a dust system, right?
No,
Hearthstone
no.
does.
Yeah, Magic has the wild card
Wild
system. So
cards, but
every X packs you open, you can basically craft anything you want.
but you don't get, yeah. Okay, yeah, because Master Duel works off a 3-to-1. Like you dust 3 cards, you can make 1 card of the same rarity.
Yeah, Magic has one of the
Um,
worst systems to be clear, but
yeah.
it is still better than what is in
Then
Yu-Gi-Oh.
this, yeah,
Yes.
in 2011 for sure.
Yes.
One other annoying thing is that we talked about the card game on motorcycles thing. So speed duels are a completely different style of duel where you use different spell cards. You can't use normal spells, and spell cards have a mana cost basically, and you get a bit each turn. Um, I hated this because I made a cool deck, and now because my cool deck relies on certain spell cards, and now I can't play those spell cards, and the spell card pools don't overlap that much. It just means like all my decks I made are just dead, and now I have to open and like none of the NPCs in the world do speed duels. So now I have to open speed duel packs
Oh
which
yeah,
give
that's the
me
other thing.
cards that I can't use against all the other NPCs because they can only be used in speed duels. And then the entire final chapter is nothing but heaps of speed duels. It's just so annoying. Just get rid of it. I hate it.
It's really funny because the thing is, in theory, I don't dislike the idea of speed duels. We've
Yeah,
spoken
I
a lot
agree.
about how Yu-Gi-Oh has no mana costs. There's no restriction when it comes to resources, and it seems like the idea behind speed duels is to ironically slow the game down. It's to add a resource cost to some of the most powerful cards. I think the problem is it just kind of leads to you sidestepping that to a lot of degrees.
Yeah,
Like
I just played decks with monsters and traps.
exactly, like you just sidestep it completely.
Because you get to spend speed points on generic actions like destroy and draw, but you have to reveal a speed card to do it. I'd play like 3 so I could access those and then play all the strong traps and all the strong monsters because it's weird because they've tried to slow the game down by limiting spell cards. But in the modern game, that's crazy to me because like 90% of all the value comes from monsters that summon other monsters.
Hmm. Yeah,
So I don't
so
know. It just doesn't hit.
so in theory, it's an interesting attempt. In practice, you have to build new decks and move away from like just when you're kind of like reaching the apex of okay, I've built these really cool new decks. It's just like 15 speed duels in a row, and you can't
Mm,
play the deck you actually want to play. It's a complete and this is the problem, right? When you make the apex of the story and the desires of your main character to be a cool motorcycle duelist, you kind of have to end the game on motorcycle duels, but they fucking suck. So the game actually gets worse the longer you play it. Now, there is nothing stopping you from just going back into the CPU duels and just trying to ignore this, but from the perspective of like playing the video game and moving to the conclusion, it means that the final stretch of the video game fucking sucks and it's boring and you hate it.
yeah, honestly, I'd recommend getting to Chapter 7 and then just like playing NPCs. That seems more fun
Exactly,
to me. Yeah.
which is crazy, but I agree with you.
Crazy.
Like, I think that's the best way to play the game.
It's annoying that it basically makes ritual and fusion, etc., impossible, and you have to make synchro decks because they're the only decks you can make without spell cards.
Yep.
Which makes sense considering 5D's was the synchro anime, but yeah, I don't know.
It just restricts the archetypes that are viable, right?
Yeah,
But it does it in a way that, just choosing to restrict spell cards doesn't actually fix the format. It just transforms it into a different format.
different
And
format.
it's a
Yeah.
format that's more restrictive. Yeah. Not a fan either.
I did want to mention briefly that not all of the side content is awful. Obviously, there's a bunch of the dual puzzles I think are cool, and the rental jewels are cool. I actually thought the tag jewels were fine. Like, I don't want to play lots of them, but I was happy to play them occasionally.
It felt kind of random to me. That was my only problem with them. It's like, because the idea behind a tag duel is essentially you share a board with your partner, and then on your turn, whatever they've developed to the board, you can use. So you do get to like play around with some stuff, and then they play around with your stuff. And they say one of the characters is like, the idea is to build a synergistic deck with your partner. And it's like, come on, I'm not gonna build a brand new deck to specifically synergize with this deck. And James, wouldn't you just build two of the same deck? Wouldn't that be the best
Maybe.
version? Wouldn't that have the best synergy? Not two different decks, but just two of the same deck?
I'm not sure. One thing I did notice is if you duel all the NPCs in the world, you do the 3 times thing. A lot of them you unlock as tag partners. Like, I think there's like 20 or so NPCs you can get as tag partners to do tag duels, which, that's something. And I don't hate the tag battles because they put you in. It's still playing your deck and it's still playing the main game, but it puts you in weird situations sometimes, which can be fun to solve.
I
So,
agree.
like,
Yeah. It's what's the word? There is novel situations, right?
yeah, it's novel and it's not. I didn't find it as intrusive as the speed duels. I still got to play my deck that I made, basically.
Yeah, like I said, my only problem with it conceptually is that if you were to do tag duels in real life, you would just use exactly
Yeah.
the same. Maybe the cool idea is that in the real tag duel format, you couldn't use the same cards in the same way that Magic
Mm.
does the team formats. So you literally have to build two complementary decks that are using different strategies. That might be fun.
There are real life team tournaments where, yeah, you can't have more than like 3 copies of the same card across your team. So you each have to, like, I think, or yeah, so you each have to like pick a different set of decks to play. I think that's a good, like, that's always interesting to watch if the format's good.
Well, that'd actually be even more interesting in Yu-Gi-Oh! I think with the way the packages are distributed and stuff. In
Yeah,
Magic, you can just like play 3 different decks, but because of the
yeah,
color pie and because of the diversity of strategies, it's like I'll play Storm, I'll play Burn, I'll play Primeval Titan, done. There's like zero overlap, easy. But
Yeah.
in Yu-Gi-Oh, that's
Uh,
probably not the case. It's probably just these packages that everyone wants to be playing.
yeah, and you have to spread interaction out differently
Yeah.
across the decks. Yeah, can be cool. That's most of my notes, to be honest.
Yeah, me too. I kind of feel like I've got a lot of what I most want to get at, and I want to thank you everyone for indulging our big spiel at the start about card games.
Yeah. I have more to talk about on that, but I think we can save some of that for another time. Let's do final impressions then. So for me, I did enjoy World Championship 2011, and I do kind of recommend it because even though it really frustrates me that this game isn't all it could be, the fact of the matter is, for the last like 10 years or so, they kind of just stopped making games like this. There really aren't that many single player card games based off these big, mature, established franchise card games anymore. So this kind of is just one of the best ones you can play to this day. That said, I still think it's fun, right? Like I had a lot of fun. I played it a lot more than I needed to because I wanted to. And to me, that's the mark of a good game ultimately. I enjoyed plain lower powered formats than is in the modern card game. I liked that the power level started very low when you started the game and ramped up towards the end. I think they did an excellent job with the in battle UI. 4,000 cards is insane for a single player game. I think they did an amazing job of giving NPCs fun decks to play with. I think the puzzles were cool, tag duels were kind of fun, music was actually pretty good. So, like, my overall enjoyment of the game was high enough that I could recommend it. That said, it is very frustrating that the story sucks, that, the overworld is kind of bland, but at the end of the day, all of that doesn't really matter when the core gameplay of the game is so enjoyable, which I think it is.
I also recommend this game, and I kind of am co-signing most of what James has said. I had a lot of fun playing this game. I had fun deck building. I had fun building these strategies. I had fun executing these strategies. I spent hours just playing against NPC duelists over and over and over again. The card pool's crazy deep. The real standout for me is the fact that you play against such a wide variety of enemy decks. To the point where I was, adjusting my strategy depending on what they did, both in terms of the cards in my deck, but also how I would play. It's not simply about doing your combo in a linear fashion. Once you understand how an opponent's deck operates, you can change the sequencing of your plays to get the best possible outcome. And definitely, I did that. I think the core gameplay here is so good that it makes up for all of the massive problems
Yeah.
surrounding it. The progression systems, the speed duel bullshit, the bland overworld, the bland story. It doesn't, it's not that these things don't matter. It's that the good here is so good that it overrides everything else. I would say the key disappointment here, more than anything else, is the progression system.
Yeah.
Like, as the game as is for most people, I would probably give like a 6 or a 7 out of 10. Like, the core mechanics are really fun to engage with, to the point that that's all that matters. But if they had good progression systems here that let you play with a wide variety of decks and made it easy to do so, this game would literally be a 10 out of 10
Mm.
because it would be fun to develop your decks in terms of strength and you would get to play with a wide variety of strategies, which is all I wanted to do. Indie developers, I am begging you, build a good version of this game. This is the future. I will buy your game. I will tell everyone about it. There is a massive black hole available for people to make a single player card game with good progression systems and good core gameplay out there. I just feel, as far as I know, that it hasn't manifested itself yet. So I recommend Yu-Gi-Oh because I had a lot of fun with it, but its problem like its good is so contrasted by the bad. It's a very interesting experience.
This is I think we've mentioned this before, but there's like two kinds of 7 out of 10 games, right? There's the 7 out of 10 game where the entire experience is 7 out of 10 and it's just kind of okay. And there's the 7 out of 10 where there's a lot of 10 and a lot of 4. and it kind of averages out to being a 7. I think this is one of those games, right? There's
There's I just want to say there's a third type of 7 out of 10, and that is deadly premonition, the deadly premonition category, where the whole game is so fucking wonky that you have no idea what score to give it, so you settle on a 7.
Where it's so bad that it kind of like integer overflows and goes back to positive.
Yeah,
Like,
I don't know that game. Yeah, it's a quantum game. It defies our normal understandings.
yeah.
Anyway, sorry, continue. I think you're right.
Yeah, so this is definitely there's 10 out of 10 here and there's 3 out of 10 here, and it collides together in a frustrating way. But ultimately, I think still worth playing if you want to play a card game.
So that is Yu-Gi-Oh 2011. My name is Patrick Arthur, and my co-host is James Turlings. You can find all of our content on our website, which is rspodcast.net. We've got links to all 135 of our episodes, a bunch of articles, etc., etc. 2 things to check out. The first of which is our Discord server. That's where we take recommendations and we have discussions with our community. Would love if you would drop by and join. The second thing is, if you would like to support the show monetarily, we have our Buy Me a Coffee page, and we'll have a link to that in the show notes as well.
So, Patrick, we've just played a card game. What are we playing next?
Well, I think it would be in poor taste to do something turn-based, so instead we're going to do something real-time. In fact, we're going to do something real-time with strategy.
Ooh.
It is time for an RTS. Been a while since we've done one of these. I think the last one we did was
it
Age of
Dawn of
Mythology,
War?
I think.
Age of Mythology, yeah.
Yeah.
Great
Dawn of War
game.
was a long time ago.
Oh god, don't say it.
So we're going to be playing Warcraft 2.
Ooh.
So I thought we might try Warcraft 1, but
I
the
hear bad
UI...
things.
Well, apparently the UI is a bit frustrating. Like, you have to press the move button or the attack button or use a key to move instead of context-sensitive right clicks. And I wanted to try this before we delved into Warcraft 3. And I did StarCraft 1 with the Nostalgia Goggles podcast, so I can't do that one again. So Warcraft 2 feels like a good sweet spot, a good warm-up for our eventual playing of Warcraft 3, which I'm sure we'll do one day. I know that a lot of people absolutely adore this game to this day, and that it hits a sweet spot in terms of UI activation and still having genuine RTS strategy. It's also apparently quite hard, I've heard. So
Okay.
I'm interested to delve into it and see what the challenge level is like. Definitely from what I've seen, you have to be prepared to lose some units. It seems like attrition is a necessary part of this game, which I find interesting because I think that adds a lot of tension when you can't use micro essentially to avoid all damage, which you kind of can do in Warcraft 3, at least.
Yeah,
the
Warcraft
main
3,
game.
I actually played a bit of that recently. I even played multiplayer Warcraft 3 recently, and it's a very interesting game because you have few units, micro's very important, hero usage is important, keeping units alive is very important. So this sounds very different to that, and I've always wanted to play this one because I'm a long time, Warcraft 3 and World of Warcraft player. So, seeing sort of this very, very early beginnings of the franchise is always been pretty interesting to me. And, we did find that, early Blizzard games are quite fun, with the exception of The Lost Vikings. But very excited for this one.
Yeah, and I'm a massive Blizzard RTS fan. I adore StarCraft, Brood War. I adore Warcraft 3. So I'm really eager to give this one a try as well.
Excellent. So we'll see you then in about a month's time for Warcraft 2.
See you then, guys. Bye.